All right, let's continue looking at factoring. This time we're going to look at trinomials and how we can factor them by grouping. And sometimes that allows us to break them down. So we're going to factor high degree polynomials by grouping them. So let's look at this example here. The factored form of 3n cubed minus 12n squared plus 2n minus 8. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all the pieces here and see is there anything that I can factor out of all of it. And there's nothing there, but I can do some grouping. I can group like this, and then I can factor out some pieces out of that. Like for instance, in the first grouping here, looks like I can factor out a 3n squared, and that'll give me n minus 4 plus, and in the second group looks like I can factor out a 2, and that gives me n minus 4 again. And when I do this, that actually shows me my two different terms. So there's my first grouping, which is 3n squared plus 2, and I can see my second one here, which is n minus 4. So when I'm grouping, I'm going to be, again, looking, is there anything I can factor out of the whole thing? And if not, can I do some grouping and factor within the groups? So why don't you go ahead and try that with the got it here. Press pause and give it a try. All right. How'd you do on this one? Again, grouped them, pulled out 2t squared, pulled out a 5, and by doing that, I was able to get my groupings and find my multiplication. Let's take a look. Factoring a binomial completely. Okay, so what is the factored form of this? Okay, I'm going to first again look at the whole thing and see, is there anything I can factor out of all of this? And it looks like there is. I can actually pull, I can factor out a 4q out of everything. So let me line that up. So I can take a 4q, yep, there's a q and everything, and I can factor that all the way out. So I am left with, yeah, I should be able to do that. Yep, and so I have a q to the third minus 2q to the second plus 3q minus 6. And from here, I can, again, look if there's anything to factor out. There's nothing there. I can do some grouping, and that should be able to help me out. So now that I've regrouped, I can look at my first grouping here and see that I can pull out a q square out of there. So I'm going to go down here. So I can see I can pull a q square out of there. So you end up with q minus 2 plus. And my second grouping, I can see that I can factor out a 3 out of there. And I end up with q, I should make that a little more obvious that it's a q. I could end up with a 3 times q minus 2, and that's good news, looking for that. And this whole thing, okay, so I end up with here I have q squared plus 3, and I've got my q minus 2, and then I've got my original 4q on the front end. All right, so again, looking for grouping. I'm factoring by grouping, and sometimes I have to group and factor, and then group and factor, and group and factor until I can get it all down completely simplified, and that's how we call it factored completely. So when you see that term, it probably means that you're going to be factoring a few times. So why don't you try it on this guy right here. Go ahead and press pause and factor by grouping. Again, look at the whole thing. Is there anything you could factor out? And when you're finished with that, consider grouping and factoring those pieces out. All right, this is what I looked at. I noticed that when I was working through this that I could pull 3h out of all of it. Let me erase that so I don't accidentally see a negative on here. But I can pull out a 3h out of everything. And then I grouped the first part here and was able to factor out an h squared. I grouped the second part and was able to factor out a 2. And by doing that, I was able to find my factors, combine all my terms, and I ended up right here. Factored completely. Took a few different times. right, here's another opportunity to do some factoring. Um, let's take a look here. Fact about the greatest common factor of this right here, and we factor out the x. To factor out the trinomial, factor out find the factors of the a term times the c term. So again, 6 times 15 is 90. And I'm looking for all the terms, so I've got all my factors: 1 and 90, 2, 45, 330, 5, 18, 6, 15, and 9, 10. So as I'm looking at this piece right here, I need to find what of these is going to give me a sum of 19. And when I look at these, it's the 9 and the 10 are going to give me that. So this tells me that I can rewrite this as x 6x squared plus, I'm going to take my 19x, I'm going to break it into its two pieces, of 9x plus 10x plus 15. And now I'm looking at this and I can do some grouping here, and then I can factor within this. Okay, in the 6x squared plus 9x, I can pull out a 3x. So I have 2x plus 3. With my second grouping here, I can see I can pull out a 5. And I end up with 3. Nope, not 3. It's going to be a 2. It's going to be a 2x plus 3. Oh, and that's nice. When we see that, I can see my two groups here. I can see my 3x plus 5. And I can see my 2x plus 3. And I bring my x just so I don't lose track of that. So my length, so the original question here, when I even look at what I'm solving for, is what expressions can represent the dimensions of the toy when folded up. So the dimensions of this toy are right here. These are the three different dimensions: x, 3x plus 5, 2x plus 3. All right, why don't you give it a try? Here's the guide up here at the top. Number 3 in geometry. So there is a trinomial. Why don't you go ahead and factor that out completely. And here's the summary of what you can do for factoring. These are some great notes to keep track of. But why don't you go ahead, press pause, and factor this out. All right, I had to do some pretty good factoring on this one. I had to pull out a 2x out of everything. And once I had my 30x squared plus 17x plus 2, I had to look at the product of 30 and 20, or 30 and 2, which gave me 60. And I had to look at the factors of 60, which are all these. And I was really looking for the sum of those of equaling 17. And I kind of kept trying, and I found it. The 12 and the 5 got me to the 17, which let me know that I could break up my 17x into the 12x and the 5x, which allowed me to group and allowed me to factor. And then notice the last part here, I had 6x, and over here there is a 1 hanging out right here. We just don't write it in, so that's how there's a 1 being distributed right there, and that's how I find it in that spot. So 2x, so the dimensions of this is 2x, 6x plus 1, 5x plus 2. All right, I'm going to go cover my best friend's grandma's yard in pink flamingos.